Here's another game from the Blitz and Rapid Play match between Garry Kasparov and Nigel Short. This was the 7th Blitz game, and by this stage Nigel was thoroughly demoralised. Nevertheless, I thought this was a very nice attack by Kasparov. So Kasparov with the white pieces, he's played e4, and against Nigel's French he's played this so-called King's Indian attack. It's basically trying to get a King's Indian reversed. Now this is not the refutation of the French, such a modest system, but I think a very good choice by Kasparov, because he's not relying on up-to-date theory. It's a system, and in a Blitz game you just want to play your moves very quickly, which is what you can normally do with this opening. So b6 from Nigel. Now that means that it's not really advisable for Kasparov to fianchetto his bishop as normal, because then his bishop has a chance to come to this diagonal. So instead Kasparov places bishop to e2, so that means there's going to be no problem with the bishop coming to a6. And in fact we transpose very quickly to a normal kind of French position. Okay, Short advancing on the queen side, trying to gain space. Rook e1 is a very useful move. It frees the f1 square for either a bishop or the knight. And finally Kasparov comes back to this typical French move. Now he's played rook e1, enabling the knight to swing round to the king side. And we have this typical French pawn structure for white and typical French pawn structure for black. Bishop a6 from Short. Of course, this was one of the ideas of playing b6. It's allowed him to exchange off this so-called bad bishop with bishop a6, a typical French maneuver, and Kasparov exchanges. And here really is the start of the middle game, and actually I think this is a very interesting position, because at this moment Kasparov has a big choice of plans. I think in a classical game of chess one would spend some time here in thinking which plan you're going to go for. You could, for example, play g3 and h4 to perhaps try to put a piece, either a bishop or a knight, on g5 and maybe make room for the knight to come to g4, and sometimes step up with the king, allowing the rook to come to h1. This is a very sound standard idea. You could also play knight g3 with the idea of bringing that knight to h5 to look at this sensitive pawn on g7, and maybe look at coming into f6 with a sacrifice at some moment. If black plays g6 to stop the knight coming to h5, of course then these dart squares around the king are weakened. So knight g3 is possible, but Kasparov went in a very different way with queen d3. Well, not very different, actually he's waiting to decide how he's going to play with his minor pieces on the king side. But queen d3 is a nice move. Of course it comes to this diagonal, that can be useful later on. Attacks the rook. If the rook goes back to, let's say, a7, then white has put a break on black's queenside expansion for the moment, because the queen covers b5. So Short played c4 and the queen dropped back. Now this means that pressure has been taken off the d4 pawn. Short expands on the queen side, but somehow it's going to take longer for black's pieces to engage on the queen side after this. So it means that also, it secures white's pawn chain. I have to say I really like white's position here. I think objectively probably black is okay, but particularly in a game with a short time control, then this position is much more fun for white to play than black, because you're attacking the king. You can see this spearhead on e5, this pawn on e5 takes away the f6 square, so it's not possible for black to use that square for a knight or a bishop. And you can see already that, you know, black's king, although it has 3 pawns in front of it, lacks a certain amount of protection. Whereas this white has all this space on the king side that he can use to bring his pieces over. So let's see how this works. So Kasparov went knight e3, could still go knight g3, could still go for h4, but instead he brought the knight over to g4. Well, that's kind of just sort of lurking nicely around black's king. I mean, I like this move a lot, this manoeuvre, rather. a4 from short. Okay, Nigel is also playing his queenside attack in a very standard way. What he wants to do is play a3, undermining the base of white's pawn chain, and after this is captured, then he would probably take on c3, and you can see how well, black has basically broken through. He can attack the c3 point. d4 is weaker. That is exactly what black wants, so that's why Kasparov played a3. He really had to block that pawn. Short opens the b file. And now here's an interesting moment. He played rook b6. He's not bothered about the a pawn. He just wants to get going with counterplay as quickly as possible, occupying the b file. I was actually surprised that Kasparov now took that a pawn. You know, in many ways that slows down his kingside attack. You know, it's a distraction, this a pawn, actually. One possible idea would just be to advance this h pawn. I think white would be delighted if black captured. In a blitz game, that's what you want. Open files against the king. This looks like fun to me. Of course, black doesn't need to take that pawn. But what I'm saying is, you know, Kasparov could continue on with his attack with h4. But instead he took the pawn. And that gave black the chance to bring heavy pieces over. Of course, white doesn't want to exchange. And here, well, I think simply rook b8 is a good move. Preparing perhaps to come into b3, maybe queen b7 and rook b1, you know, coming in here. I mean, this a pawn really doesn't play any part in the game, can be blockaded very, very easily. The important thing is for black to break through and distract white from his kingside attack. But instead, short played h5, and I think this is a big error of judgment. Listen, I don't want to criticise the players too much in this game. This is a blitz game after all. One should never really analyse blitz games in detail, but h5 I don't like, I have to say, because it makes it much easier for white to open up the king side, which is what Kasparov did. g4. It really wasn't necessary to push that knight out of the way. So with an open file, that makes white's task to break through to the king much easier. Still, objectively, I'm sure black is okay here. I think queen b7 is a good move, looking to come into b1 to try to trade pieces. But instead, short played rook b7. I think he's looking to connect with the king side. Kasparov played very simply king h1. Good move, preparing to bring his rook to g1. Now knight a5, that is really just too casual. Here Kasparov played a very normal, natural move, rook g1, and I think he has a very good position. In fact, just for the record, he could have won immediately with knight h6 check. It's the kind of move you don't consider in a blitz game when you can play a natural move like rook g1 very easily without calculating. But knight h6 check wins. If king f8, then queen h7, that's obviously good for white. King h8, you can take on f7. And if it's taken, then this is actually really simple. So rook g1 check is threatened. Rook g1 anyway, threatening bishop g7 check. And this threatens mate on f7. And there's no decent defense now. Of course, this threatens queen h7 mate as well. and here it's just a case of bringing the queen over. So that's coming to h5 and mate very quickly. But as I said, this is a blitz game. One doesn't calculate like things like that in a blitz game. You just put your pieces on good squares, and rook g1 is obviously a good move, and I think black is just lost here actually. Bishop g5 basically clears the way for a piece to come to g5. You want to play knight g5. You also want to threaten either knight f6 or bishop f6. And the basic problem is that black's king doesn't have defenders around it. That pawn on e5 does a brilliant job of preventing black's pieces from coming over. This is the problem with the French. If you don't get it right on the queen side, your king can suffer. Let's see how the game ended. I mean, really, it's not a lot of fun now. Nigel played rook b2. The queen stepped back, but that is, of course, coming forward to f4. And there's really no defence here at all. These moves not terribly difficult. Clearly, that one is not a lot of fun when there are two checkmates threatened, queen f7 and g8. So basically Kasparov breaks through here, and Nigel attempts to evacuate his king to the queen side, but Kasparov just takes everything. And well, it's utterly lost now. I'll go through the final few moves, but it's pretty painful. And here, well, it's pretty miserable. You can move the rook aside, but let's say bishop f6 followed by rook check, for example. I mean, there are many ways to win this position. Afraid Nigel gave up the queen here, but after that he also gave up the game. So a bit of a rout, and I feel sorry for Nigel. He was obviously wrecked by this stage, but once again a very well played attack by Kasparov. Over the next couple of weeks, I think, before the next big tournament starts, I'm going to look at a couple more Kasparov games, not from this match, but I'm going to pick a couple of my favourite games from Garry Kasparov's career and show you those. So look out for that. By the way, there's a great similarity between this game and a game that Kasparov and Short played before in 2001, which you can see on the Kasparov playlist on this channel. So do check that out. There's a link to that game at the end of this video. You'll see the similarity when you play through that one. Thanks.